Hello, everyone. I'm excited to have Johnny Sanchez with us today. He is my first cousin, my Uncle John's son, my dad's brother, John. And so he has an incredible journey to share with us. And I'm so proud of all of his accomplishments. So first of all, I am just going to let him tell us a little bit more about himself.
Sure. Hi. As Kim said, my name's Johnny. So I'm from Winged, New Mexico, which is about half an hour north of Santa Fe, if you know where that is. So it's in this sort of really interesting section of New Mexico that has all this history that's intertwined with, Spanish colonization and, indigenous roots that go back, thousands of years. So it's a really neat area, and especially looking at it through the lens of a lot of social justice, racial justice issues that have been coming to light, but have also been around for a long time. It's really interesting to look at it with that lens. But yeah, so that's where I'm from. I went to elementary school there, and then I ended up going to middle and high school in Santa Fe at the Santa Fe Indian School, which is an all Native American school. Which again comes with an interesting history that is tied back to assimilation boarding schools that the US government put into place, basically to assimilate indigenous people into white American culture. So it does have sort of an ugly history and an ugly past in those terms. But within recent years, the school has been bought and is now organized and run by the 19 Pueblo tribes, which in a really cool way has hopefully, and I can attest a little bit to having gone there, been able to turn some of that history on its head. So I took classes like Native American history and Native Americans of New Mexico history. And we now teach, I learned part of my native language, Tewa, there, which is cool. So they teach a handful of different indigenous language classes there. So kids come from around New Mexico, because it is a boarding school. So kids come from around New Mexico, and you can go there and you can learn, your indigenous tongue, which is really neat. So it was an interesting place to go to school. And so after high school, I ended up coming to the other side of the country. So I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire for my undergraduate degree, where I studied environmental studies and psychology. And it was a pretty good experience. I was really lucky in that I got to study abroad, and I was lucky enough to go to Barcelona for a semester, which was really great to experience some of that history. I got to go to the more central areas of Spain, which some of our family is from, which was really neat. And I also got to study abroad in Southern Africa and see how life there, which was nothing that I had ever experienced, and which actually has another sort of interesting history with colonization, which in a lot of ways mirrors a lot of what happened in the Southwest in the US. So it was really interesting to see those two things juxtaposed. So that was cool. And after I graduated from undergrad, I worked on a farm in Vermont for a while. I helped manage a farm, which was a great experience because I grew up helping my grandparents run their small little vegetable operation and cattle. And on my dad's side of the family, they also had a farm and cattle. So it was just really good to it felt like I was going back to my roots a little bit. And after that, I was sort of just left in this weird position where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, but realized that I, always really enjoyed school. So I figured graduate degree wasn't a bad way to go, and it sort of felt like hitting the pause button on real life for a while, so that was kind of nice. So I found myself at the University of Maine, where I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in sustainable agriculture with a focus on weed ecology. So my research involves trying to make tools that are used for killing agricultural weeds more effective and less variable. That way we can hopefully move away from using problematic chemical herbicides. Yeah, so I guess that's my background, more or less.
That's a lot right there to unpack. So I'm gonna kind of backtrack just a little bit. You talked about being from Okewinge, New Mexico, and it's in recent years that has changed to Okewinge, right? It was formerly San Juan Pueblo.
Yeah, it's happened within my lifetime.
Okay, and so I'm curious. Can you share a little bit more about why you grew up in that area? We know just from my introduction that your dad's family comes from San Luis, where I'm from, and so what brought you to that area?
Sure, yeah. So, like you said, my dad is from the San Luis Valley, and he and my mom met when my mom was in school in Colorado, and they like through a handful of different places. They lived in Texas for a while, and then they lived in Albuquerque, which is actually where I was born. And then when I was like 2 or 3 years old, they moved back to the reservation, or at least my mom was coming back to the reservation where she grew up. Because of some like job stuff. And so that's where I ended up growing up, which was really great because I got to spend a lot of time with my grandparents, so my maternal grandparents, who lived on sort of the family farm. So I got to like, help with the cows most days. I stayed with them most of the summer, so I got to like hang out with the cows. And, my grandparents taught me how to farm, which was really cool because I've always had such a love for growing food and feeding people. That's sort of a lot of where my passion lies, I've learned in the last few years. So yeah, it was an interesting place to live. I grew up, participating in indigenous ceremonies with my tribe, which is really cool because for a number of reasons that you can get into when you look at the whole historic picture, a lot of indigenous populations are shrinking, so it's really important that those cultural aspects aren't lost. So I was happy. Yeah, exactly. So I was happy that my grandma was pretty traditional and tried to pass down as much as she could.
So tell me about your mom's family and your grandmother. She was a beautiful, beautiful lady. And so you talked about being Tewa, and that's the tribal affiliation for Okewinge, correct?
Well, that's the name of the language. So there were originally around 80 Pueblo tribes along the Rio Grande Valley. And then during Spanish colonization, that number dropped as, genocide and diseases and some tribes combined. So now there are 19 Pueblo tribes along the Rio Grande Valley, one of which is Okewinge. So that's it's kind of funny because it's the name of the place and the name of the tribe, and we speak Tewa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, of course. My grandma was a really interesting and brilliant woman. She, along with a handful of other native speakers from the tribe and a linguist, were actually involved with creating the written form of our language, which is really neat. And her sister, my great aunt Esther Martinez, was kind of famous for preserving a lot of our like tribal stories, and she got a couple like national recognition awards for that too, which was really cool and well deserved. I don't know. So I mean, it's nice to have that sort of history and those strong maternal lines in my history.
Absolutely. So that was a huge experience for you growing up, understanding all of that culture and knowing both parts of your family heritage. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I would never say that I understood all of it. There's just
having been able to grow up in that environment, in other words.
Yeah. And I mean, there's just so much there to understand. And I was pretty young at the time, so like sometimes now I look back in retrospect, I'm like, I really wish I had paid more attention when she was saying that, or that sort of thing. So but, we do what we can with at the time we have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. There's so many times I wish I would have interviewed Grandma Jenny, or my great grandma, who I actually got to know until probably, I think it was my freshman year of college. My great grandma Aurelia Bernal, Grandma Jenny's mom. So I knew her, and I would have, in retrospect, I should have interviewed her, when I was younger. But we do what we can, just like you say. And when we're younger, sometimes we just don't know, So
yeah, but it's important to at least think about it now,
For sure. Yeah, and just continue to do what we can to pass on what we do know, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about those travels. Like, what did you get to do when you were in Spain and in South Africa? What kinds of, were you involved in projects, or was it a study abroad program as a whole, or?
Yeah, so I was really lucky in that Dartmouth makes it super easy to travel abroad. It's sort of like one of their main selling points, when you visit campus. Partially because you're required to take so many semesters of a language program. And one of the easiest and most fun ways to fulfill your language requirement is to spend a semester in a country that speaks that language. So I was lucky enough to spend a semester in Barcelona, which was really neat. I took like sort of standard grammar and literature classes, and so I took a Spanish literature course, which was really, really interesting, because it was cool to like actually read pieces of Spanish literature in Spanish, which I'm sure I missed some of the nuances there because my Spanish still isn't great. But it was interesting to have that sort of like unabridged approach to that. And then the same thing, I took a Spanish art history course, which was really cool because, we got to like go to like the Prado Museum in Madrid. So like that was cool. And then go to all of these giant cathedrals and learn about, the architecture and the different artists that influenced those time periods. And so that was really cool. So I'm also a rock climber, and there's fantastic rock climbing in Spain. So I was also really lucky that a friend of mine was also on that trip, and we'd go rock climbing on the weekends and that sort of thing. So that was neat. It was a really good experience. And so the other time I studied abroad to finish my major was when I was in Southern Africa. So we were in South Africa, Lesotho, and Namibia. So that was primarily a semester that involved going to a bunch of different places in Southern Africa, and through interviews and just interacting with people, trying to understand how people interact with their environments. And South Africa has some pretty interesting regulations along their coast, including like marine protected areas, that sort of thing. So we would spend whole days interviewing fishermen to be like, how do you feel about these regulations? And some of them would be super angry because they're like, I can't catch all the fish that I used to catch. And then other people would be like, I'm actually really happy that we're not destroying the ecosystem. And it was cool to see those things sort of in the same line. We went to this, we did some homestays. So I lived with a family in Lesotho, which is this tiny little country that is actually completely encapsulated by South Africa. It's at like this, 9,000 foot above sea level mountains. So it's just this beautiful, like pristine area in the mountains. And I, spent my days taking care of cows with, the people that were letting me stay in their house. And we would interview people there and be like, how has it been farming in this area? And what, have you noticed any changes happening due to climate change, or people coming in that area to recreate, because it's starting to become sort of like a hub for mountain biking, and just all of this influx from other countries, and how that changes the environment and the culture. And so, yeah, it was a really interesting experience. And then when I was in Namibia, we were actually in the Dune Sea, which is this massive area of sand dunes. And we were studying this plant called Ngara, which is a Topnar word, which is an indigenous people in that area. And it's a really important crop there. It's kind of wild. It's a cucurbit, but it's this giant vine with thorns and stuff. And part of my research there was to see if the plants themselves were creating a microclimate to, like, we're just trying to figure out what allows them to survive in the desert there, because it's, I don't know, sand dunes. So it was a really interesting experience. It was really hard, but it was worth it.
How fun. I have always been a fan of immersing yourself in a different culture in a different place for a significant amount of time, just because of how you get to see the world from a different perspective from your own. And so I think that's, wow, what incredible experiences that you've had.
Yeah, I've been really lucky in those terms.
Yeah, so cool. So through all of those experiences, tell me about an obstacle that you overcame and what got you through.
That's a good question. I think, yeah, and I guess this might be sort of tangential, but a lot of the times when I've left the country or even just gone to a different part of the country, going back home always feels really strange and almost foreign, in that you have this sort of peek into your own culture and your own home from the outside, almost, just because you're sort of used to this other realm. So I was also lucky, and when I was in high school, I spent a summer in Indonesia and had this exact same experience when I came home, where I was like, oh, this is kind of trippy because I feel a little bit like I'm an outsider. And so I think those experiences are really important, because it sort of pops your bubble in a way that is really helpful, I think, because often you can get caught up in, your own life and the way things are around you, that you don't always take the time to realize that the world is bigger than that. And, there are people everywhere who, are living their own lives and have their own struggles. And sometimes you forget how interconnected all of those things are. And it is really important to value the things that make us special, and, the parts of our culture that, especially as minority people, they're, parts of our culture that really need to be preserved and thought about all the time, just, because of all the historical injustices that have tried to sweep those under the rug. It's important to keep those, at the forefront, but it's also really good to remember that we are all connected, and that the more we think like that, I think the less or the fewer injustices there will be, hopefully. I don't know, that's sort of my optimistic.
Because we have an understanding, a better understanding, and I think more compassion for one another if we look at it from that perspective. I like that.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. So not only are you well-traveled and brilliant academically, but you are also an amazing photographer. So tell me a little bit about how you got into photography.
Yeah, so I guess it goes back to when I was studying abroad in Southern Africa. A friend of mine was on that same semester program and is an absolutely brilliant photographer, and is currently in Kenya doing some photojournalism stuff, and sort of just through hanging out with her, and she was like, yeah, this is sort of my process when I think about taking photos. And it was, I don't know, it evolved into this really sort of ongoing discussion that we sort of bring up pretty often, where we're like, what's the difference between documentation and art in terms of photography, which I is pretty prevalent in a lot of my work, and sort of just the thing that I like to think about when I take photos. And yeah, so ever since then, I started out just taking photos on my iPhone and was like, oh, that looks kind of cool. And then eventually I was like, maybe I should get a camera. So I saved up, bought a camera, Eventually saved up more and bought another camera. I now have way too much camera gear that I feel a little guilty about it sometimes, because it's become a bit of an obsession. And you know, I've gone into the realm of like, oh, maybe I could take my camera when I go climbing with my friends, and you know, that led me into this whole other world of climbing photography, which is really cool. Lately, I've been experimenting with trying to weave my research into bits of photography. So like I, you know, bought a macro lens that allows me to see really small things, and you know, I'll like take it with me when I go do field work, and I'm like my field, my experimental field, and being like, why didn't these certain crops come up? And if you look at some of the leaves of those crops, you can see that there's beetle damage. And the other day I actually got a really interesting video of a flea beetle, which is a small beetle that eats brassica crops. So it was really cool to like have some of my own personal interests intertwined with my work stuff as well. So that's been fun.
Probably have fun with the aphids on my petunias right now. I'm so upset.
Well, I don't know how to fix that, but I could take pictures of them.
I was gonna say, bring them out so I can see what they look like. And anyway, but it's so cool to hear you talk about this, because your mom and dad are two of my favorite people in the world, and I could see both of them in you. I know your mom was a big photographer. She loved to take pictures. And your dad, ever since I can remember, he always had like the latest equipment. Like I think his was like the first Atari that I ever saw, and he had like the first, you know, video camera that I had ever seen, I think, at that point. And he documented when Sammy and I graduated from Head Start. And so, you know, he's the one that used to be able to take videos of our family get-togethers and things like that. And so it's just really cool to see them through what you're doing. So yeah, I love that. That's awesome. So through all of this, what, you know, again, you've got such an amazing journey, an incredible journey, and you're so young. There's still so much more to do and to experience. Through all of that, what kind of advice have you come across that you would give to anyone that might follow in your footsteps, either traveling and hiking or photography, or, you know, going through school? You know, what kind of advice would you give someone?
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing for me has been realizing that there are places and within groups and within activities that a lot of the time, you know, that people don't feel comfortable within, whether it's because, you know, you're a minority from, you know, a minority race, or if you're, you know, like if you're a female in like certain physical activities like climbing or something, for one, is definitely a male dominated sport. So if you see something that interests you, and you also realize that maybe it's not a place where you see a lot of people that look or feel like you, that can be really off-putting. And for me, it's been really important when I look back that I sort of made the active choice to do the thing that felt a little scary and like kind of push myself. And I do recognize that I have certain privileges that allow me to navigate those waters a little bit easier than some other people, but like, yeah, I think it's really important to anyone's life to try to do some of the things that feel a little risky or a little scarier, because a lot of the time you never really know where your passions might lie. And in retrospect, that's definitely been how I've found some of the things that I feel most passionate about and that make me the happiest and that have brought me this far. So that'd be my advice, I guess.
Push yourself beyond your comfort zone, and and that's where you might find your passion, or find where your passion lies. I like that a lot. It's really great. Yeah, definitely words to live by. And we don't know, I think, what we are able to do until we do sort of push ourselves beyond that comfort zone sometimes. So yeah, exactly. We realize the strength and bravery that we might have that were hidden otherwise. So yeah, I think that's great. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. It's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing about all your amazing accomplishments and your journey. So thank you.
Yeah, same. I'm so happy that you're doing this. I think this is a really neat idea.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had a blast getting to know so many different people and hearing about their stories and their stories that need to be told. You know, one of those things where we're telling our stories through our own, experiences and through our own voices. And that's really, really important to me. So thank you again. And so great to catch up with you.
Yeah, same. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hopefully we can get together next year for our reunion for the 4th of July.
Yeah, I'd like that. That'd be great.
Sounds good. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you everybody for watching. This has been a La Gente Legacy production and successful in the SLV. Stay tuned for more.